I have been hauling freight for nearly 12 years now. This incident took place in 2019. I was making a late-night run through the Nevada desert, carrying electronics bound for Las Vegas. The night was unusually cold for September. My truck's heater had been acting up for weeks, but I kept postponing the repair. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, with nothing but sagebrush and darkness on both sides. Traffic was practically non-existent at that hour. I had not seen another vehicle for over an hour. The only sounds were my engine's steady rumble and the occasional static from my CB radio. I was making good time and expected to reach my destination before dawn. Around 3 in the morning, I spotted something unusual ahead. A large pickup truck was parked sideways across both lanes, completely blocking the road. Its headlights were still on, casting strange shadows across the asphalt. I downshifted and brought my rig to a gradual stop about 50 yards away. The pickup looked like a newer Chevy Silverado, dark blue or black. Steam was rising from under its hood, and the driver's side door hung open at an odd angle. At first, I assumed someone had broken down and needed assistance. I have always tried to help fellow drivers when possible. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down from the cab, leaving my engine running and hazards flashing. The desert air was crisp and still. My footsteps on the gravel shoulder seemed unnaturally loud. As I approached the pickup, I called out to see if anyone needed help. No response came back. I walked around to the driver's side and peered inside. The cab was empty, but the keys were dangling from the ignition. The radio was playing softly, some late-night talk show. A half-empty coffee cup sat in the center console, still warm to the touch. This struck me as very strange. Why would someone abandon a running vehicle in the middle of nowhere? I checked the truck bed with my flashlight. It was empty except for some tools and a tarp bunched up in one corner. I was about to head back to my truck when I heard a metallic clanging sound coming from somewhere behind the pickup. It was rhythmic, like someone digging or hitting something repeatedly. The sound seemed to be coming from a small wash that ran parallel to the highway. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I walked toward the sound, following a faint path that led down into the wash. My flashlight beam revealed disturbed earth and what looked like a partially filled hole. A man suddenly emerged from the shadows near a large boulder. He was tall and thin, wearing a baseball cap and work clothes. In his hands, he carried a long-handled shovel. When he saw me, he froze completely. We stared at each other for several seconds. He looked exhausted and nervous. His clothes were dirty, and sweat was visible on his face despite the cool night air. Neither of us spoke at first. Finally, he asked what I was doing out there. I explained that I was just trying to help with what I thought was a breakdown. He nodded slowly but did not lower the shovel. His eyes kept darting between me and something behind the boulder. I asked if he needed any assistance. He shook his head and told me everything was fine. He said he was just taking care of some business and would be moving his truck shortly. There was something in his voice that made me uncomfortable. I told him I would wait to make sure he got back on the road safely. That was when his demeanor changed completely. He stepped closer and told me I should leave immediately. His grip on the shovel tightened noticeably. I decided not to argue. I backed away slowly, keeping my flashlight pointed toward him. He followed me partway up the path, staying about 20 feet behind. When I reached my truck, I climbed into the cab as quickly as possible. I started driving around his pickup, using the shoulder to get past. As I pulled alongside the truck, I saw him running back toward the road. In my side mirror, I watched him throw the shovel into his truck bed and jump behind the wheel. His headlights appeared in my mirrors within minutes. He was driving aggressively, staying close to my trailer. I increased my speed as much as I dared on the winding desert highway. The Silverado kept pace easily. After about 10 minutes, he started flashing his high beams and honking his horn. He was clearly trying to get me to stop. I had no intention of doing that. I reached for my CB radio and called for help on the emergency channel. A state trooper responded almost immediately. I explained my location and the situation as best I could while trying to concentrate on driving. The officer said he was about 15 minutes away and advised me to keep moving. The pickup suddenly accelerated and pulled into the oncoming lane beside me. The driver was gesturing frantically for me to pull over. When I ignored him, he swerved toward my truck, nearly clipping my front bumper. Just as I thought he might try to force me off the road, I saw flashing red and blue lights approaching from ahead. The pickup immediately fell back and took the next exit, disappearing into the darkness. The state trooper took my statement and called for additional units to search the area. He told me I had probably interrupted something illegal, most likely drug-related activity. The wash I described was apparently a known smuggling route. They never found the man or his truck that night. The officer called me a few days later to say they had discovered several recently dug holes in the wash, but nothing else. The case was turned over to federal authorities. I still think about that night whenever I drive through remote areas. My fellow drivers have heard this story many times, and most agree that I stumbled onto something I was not supposed to see. Whatever that man was burying out there, he was desperate to keep it hidden. I am grateful the state trooper arrived when he did. I have no doubt that the situation could have turned out much worse for me. These days, I try to stick to more traveled routes whenever possible, especially during the overnight hours. Some encounters on the road are better left alone. Most people think trucking is just about driving from point A to point B, but there's so much more to it than that. The mental side of things can really get to you if you're not prepared. I've been hauling freight for about 3 years now, ever since I left my job at the factory. People said I was crazy to give up steady work, but the road called to me. Most of the time, I love what I do. This particular run was from Phoenix to Denver, a solid 14-hour drive if you push it. I had already been on the road for 6 hours when I realized I was running low on fuel. The gauge was sitting just above the red line, and I knew better than to push my luck. The problem was that I was in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in the Utah desert. The last truck stop I had seen was over an hour behind me. I started scanning the horizon for any sign of civilization. Finally, I spotted what looked like a fuel station about a mile off the interstate. It was one of those old-style places with the tall sign that you could see from far away. As I got closer, though, something felt off about it. The parking lot was completely empty and half the lights on the sign weren't working, but I could see that at least one of the fuel pumps had a working display. So I figured it was worth a shot. I pulled my rig up to the pump and stepped out. The silence was overwhelming. No traffic noise, no people, just the sound of wind blowing across the desert. I tried to start the pump, but nothing happened. The card reader was dark. That's when I noticed the station's front door was propped open with a cinder block. I walked over and called out to see if anyone was inside. No answer. I poked my head through the doorway and saw that the place looked like it had been cleaned out months ago. Empty shelves, disconnected equipment, dust covering everything. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was coming from behind me, from the direction of my truck. A soft, metallic scraping sound, like something being dragged across the trailer floor. I turned around slowly and stared at my rig. Everything looked normal from the outside. The trailer doors were still closed and locked, just like I had left them. But I knew I had heard something. I walked back to my truck and did a complete walk-around inspection. Nothing seemed out of place. The locks were intact, the seals were unbroken. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Road fatigue can play tricks on your mind. I climbed back into the cab and decided to try the next exit for fuel. As I started the engine, I thought I heard that scraping sound again. But this time, it was definitely coming from inside the trailer. My hands started shaking as I reached for my phone. I called 911 and explained the situation. The dispatcher told me to drive to the nearest highway patrol station and not to stop for anything. The next 25 minutes felt like hours. Every small bump in the road made me wonder if whoever was back there was getting ready to break through into the cab. When I finally reached the patrol station, I parked right in front of the building and ran inside. Within minutes, 3 officers were at my truck with their weapons drawn. They positioned themselves around the trailer and ordered me to unlock the doors. What they found inside still gives me nightmares. 4 people were crammed into the front corner of the trailer, hidden behind some cargo that they had rearranged. They were dirty and looked like they hadn't eaten in days. When the officers pulled them out, I could see makeshift weapons made from scrap metal and broken glass. None of them would say how they got into my trailer or what they planned to do. They just stared at me with this cold, calculating look that made my skin crawl. The lead officer told me later that they found evidence the group had been breaking into trucks for weeks. I still drive the same routes, but now I check my trailer at every single stop. Some experiences change you, and this was definitely one of them. The open road doesn't feel as peaceful as it used to. My name is Marcus. I have been driving long haul for 12 years now. Most people think trucking is just about moving from point A to point B, but they do not understand the mental games your mind plays on you during those long, dark stretches of highway. The pay depends on getting your loads delivered on time. No delays, no excuses. That means pushing through when your body wants to quit. I have learned to work with maybe 3 hours of sleep when necessary. My regular route takes me through some of the most remote parts of Wyoming and Colorado. 3 years ago, I was hauling electronics from Denver to a distribution center outside Cheyenne. It was a Thursday night in September, and I was running behind schedule because of an earlier delay at the loading dock. The pressure was on to make up time. Wyoming highways can be brutal at night. Long stretches of nothing but darkness on both sides. No streetlights, no gas stations, just you and the road. I had been driving for about 6 hours straight when fatigue started hitting me hard. My eyes felt heavy, and I caught myself drifting a couple times. I knew I should pull over, but the nearest truck stop was still 40 miles away. I needed something to keep me alert for just a little longer. I reached for the energy drinks I keep stashed in my cooler. The caffeine hit my system fast, but I could tell it was going to be a temporary fix. My vision kept getting blurry, and I had to shake my head constantly to stay focused. Then I saw something that made me question if I was losing it completely. There was a car parked sideways across both lanes of the highway. No headlights, no hazard lights. Just sitting there in the middle of the road like a roadblock. I hit my brakes and brought the rig to a stop about 50 feet away. I sat there for a moment trying to process what I was seeing. The car looked like an old sedan, maybe from the 1990s. It was positioned perfectly to block both lanes. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the cab. The night air was cold and helped clear my head a little. I approached the car cautiously, calling out to see if anyone needed help. No response. When I got close enough to shine my light through the windows, I could see the car was completely empty. The keys were still in the ignition, but the engine was off. The doors were unlocked. Everything about it felt wrong. I walked around the vehicle looking for any signs of an accident or mechanical failure. Nothing. The car appeared to be in perfect working condition. Someone had just parked it there and walked away. That was when I heard the diesel engine starting up behind me. I spun around to see my own truck beginning to roll forward. Someone was in my cab driving my rig. I sprinted toward the truck, shouting and waving my flashlight. The person behind the wheel saw me coming and gunned the engine. My truck started picking up speed, heading straight down the highway with my entire livelihood inside it. I ran after it for maybe 100 yards before realizing how pointless it was. I stopped in the middle of the road, breathing hard and watching my taillights disappear into the darkness. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere with no phone signal and an abandoned car. I walked back to the sedan and tried the engine. It started right up. Whoever had left it there had made sure it was running perfectly. This whole thing had been planned. I drove the sedan to the nearest town and called the state police from a gas station. They found my truck 3 hours later, abandoned in a parking lot about 30 miles away. Nothing was stolen. The trailer was still sealed, and all my personal belongings were untouched. The officers told me this was not the first time something like this had happened on that stretch of highway. They suspected it was some kind of initiation or test, but they never figured out who was behind it or what the real purpose was. I got my truck back and completed my delivery, but I never felt the same about driving that route at night. The whole experience lasted maybe 20 minutes, but it changed how I think about those empty highways. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I had not chased after my truck. What if I had stayed with the abandoned car longer? What were they really testing, and did I pass or fail? The scariest part was not the theft itself, but the planning behind it. Someone had been watching truckers on that route, studying our patterns and waiting for the right moment. They knew exactly how tired drivers behave and how to exploit that vulnerability. I still drive long haul, but I am much more careful about when and where I stop. Some roads are not as empty as they appear, and sometimes the biggest danger is not falling asleep at the wheel, but the people who are wide awake and watching you struggle to stay alert. In all my years on the road, nothing has come close to being as calculated and unsettling as that night. The memory of watching my own truck drive away without me still gives me chills. I've been working night shifts as a delivery driver for a medical supply company for 8 years. 2 years ago, I was making my usual route through the mountain roads in Colorado. I was driving my cargo van on March 15th, a Thursday night that would change everything. The weather was clear but cold, and I was running behind schedule. My last delivery was to a rural clinic about 2 hours away from the city. I started the drive at 11 p.m., hoping to finish before dawn and get home to my family. I pushed the speed limit on those winding mountain roads. The van felt heavy with the remaining medical equipment in the back. I was tired from working double shifts that week, but the overtime pay was worth it. I just needed to power through one more delivery. My eyes were starting to burn from staring at the dark road ahead. I rolled down the window and let the cold air hit my face. It helped wake me up for a few minutes. The mountain road was completely empty at this hour, with nothing but my headlights cutting through the darkness. About halfway through the drive, I saw something that made me grip the steering wheel tighter. There was a woman standing on the side of the road, just at the edge of where my headlights reached. She was wearing a white dress that seemed to glow in the darkness. Her hair was extremely long, hanging down past her waist. I slowed down as I approached her, thinking she might need help. But as I got closer, something felt wrong. She was standing perfectly still, not waving or trying to get my attention. Her head was tilted at an odd angle, like she was listening to something I could not hear. I rolled down my window and called out to ask if she was okay. She turned her head toward me, but I could not see her face clearly in the darkness. Without saying anything, she stepped backward into the trees and disappeared. I sat there for a moment, confused, then continued driving. About 10 minutes later, I saw her again. This time she was standing in the middle of the road, much farther ahead. I hit the brakes and came to a complete stop. The woman was facing me now, and even from a distance, I could see that same white dress flowing in the wind. I honked the horn twice, thinking she would move out of the way. Instead, she began walking toward my van. Her movements were strange, like she was gliding rather than walking normally. I put the van in reverse and backed up about 50 feet, then waited. She kept coming closer. When she reached the spot where my van had been, she stopped and stood there for what felt like forever. I could see her more clearly now in my headlights. Her face was completely white, and her eyes looked like black holes. She was smiling, but it was not a normal smile. It was too wide, showing too many teeth. I drove around her, giving the spot a wide berth, and pressed harder on the gas pedal. My hands were shaking as I checked the rearview mirror. She was gone. The road behind me was empty. For the next 20 minutes, I drove as fast as I safely could on those mountain curves. I was almost to the clinic when I had to stop for a fallen branch blocking the road. I got out to move it, and that is when I heard it. Someone was humming a tune I had never heard before. It was coming from the woods on my left side. The melody was beautiful but haunting, like a lullaby sung in a minor key. I quickly moved the branch and got back in the van. As I drove the last few miles to the clinic, I kept hearing that humming. It seemed to follow me, sometimes louder, sometimes quieter, but always there. When I finally reached the clinic and made my delivery, the humming stopped. I drove home as the sun was rising, taking a different route through the valley instead of the mountain road. I never saw the woman again, but I still hear that humming sometimes when I drive alone at night. The rational part of my mind says I was just exhausted and seeing things that were not there, but I cannot explain how vivid it all was, or why I can still remember every detail so clearly. Sometimes, I wonder if she's still out there on that mountain road, waiting for the next driver to come along.